Hello and welcome along to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. Before we get stuck into the show, don't forget to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan. You can go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link gives you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee, and the link with all of that is in the podcast episode box below. But, of course, there is only one topic for the show. That is Trent Alexander-Arnold, who has decided to leave Liverpool. It's not been officially confirmed that Real Madrid will be his destination, but I think it's fair to say we have known that for a little while now. It's felt certainly the case that has been the way that things have been edging. And, Michael, I'll come to you first on it. Obviously, it's a story that is breaking, as I say, in terms of the last couple of days, but not really. We've known about this for a while. Were you surprised at all at this being the case, not necessarily this week, but sort of more generally that he has decided to make this decision? What have you made of it so far in terms of what we know?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've known for a long time what way this was going. And I think if there were any doubts, even in kind of, let's say, February, March time, things that have happened in the last couple of weeks have made it very obvious. The fact that Van Dijk and Salah got their contract signed and Alexander-Arnold's just kept rolling on. I think the fact that his comments after he scored the goal against Leicester said a lot. I think Slot talking about previously and historically what he's done as well. And the fact that the club chose not to put him up for interviews after Liverpool won the title. I think these were just all signs of where it was going. So when the news actually broke, it wasn't a surprise. I mean, it's always is a surprise. The actual moment it dropped, it is always like a bit of surprise in itself, and it's suddenly all hands to the pump, really, isn't it? Getting everything sorted. But I think that it probably was the right time actually to announce it, because obviously the title's wrapped up. I think it's better to announce it beforehand. I think it would have looked almost slightly cowardly if he'd have got to the end of the season, waited for the trophy parade, and then slipped out the back door. So, yeah, it's been a bit of a mad 24 hours or so, really. But I think that from everyone's perspective, I think we're pleased it's announced. I think, for us as journalists, it's pleased that we don't have to write about the speculation of it anymore. We can actually write about kind of cold hard facts and what's really happening. I think from Liverpool's perspective, they're probably pleased it's out there. And I think Trent is the same. The only thing now I'm missing is the confirmation that it's Real Madrid, which obviously we expect to come, at some point in May, probably, but who knows exactly when. But yeah, that's the final piece of the jigsaw, I suppose.
Yeah, it's been coming a long time, hasn't it, Tom? There's been loads and loads of people who've had their say, and there's been various reactions to it from the kind of Liverpool supporting end of not being really able to understand it, to other people saying, well, it's Real Madrid, of course he was going to make this decision. It's a little bit of a spectrum. I think it's fair to say, a lot of people have been split on it, but where do you kind of stand? Can you understand some of the reasons that he might have made this decision? Is it a decision that you would have made yourself if you were in his shoes? I mean, what have your thoughts been, and how quickly have you been able to formulate those since the announcement came?
Yeah, in some ways it's one of the most confusing situations I've had as a fan, and certainly in my career as a journalist as well, where obviously we've had examples in the past of great players who've decided to move on. Maybe a point in time when Liverpool weren't challenging for major honours kind of every year. You think of Coutinho and Luis Suarez and players like that, Torres, even going back a little bit further. But I think, the situation at Liverpool now is so much different. Liverpool are challenging on all 4 fronts, it seems to be, over the course of this season. Liverpool have won the league championship. So I think Liverpool at the moment are in such a great position. And I think that's maybe why it does leave a bit of confusion for a lot of fans. And I think simply for Alexander-Arnold, it must be the case that, he fancies a new challenge. Obviously, he hinted at that in the interview that he gave to the club, sort of announcing it yesterday, didn't he? That, ultimately, he's been at the club since the age of 6. He's been at the club for 20 years now, and I think he just feels as though he deserves him and feels like a new challenge. But in terms of whether I would do it myself, I think it comes back to the fact that, he's playing for his boyhood club, he's in the city. I think it does mean more as well. I think that you know, it is a cliche about Liverpool, but it's a special club, and it's tied to that wonderful fan base that the club has got. And, you know, he's looked them supporters kind of dead in the eye, you know, in the away end that you mentioned before against Leicester, and, you know, games like that where you could see the passion that's there. I think he still loves the club. I think he obviously still loves the city as well. But, yeah, it's a bit of a decision where I think you get judged on your decisions maybe after your career in terms of your legacy and stuff like that. And unfortunately, I think it will always be tied to his legacy at Liverpool Football Club now, that the fact that he did leave for nothing. Yeah, he came for nothing. But, yeah, to leave when you're basically a £100 million player for nothing, you know, it does leave a bit of a sour taste, I think, for a lot of supporters. And whether I do it myself, I think the chance of becoming Liverpool captain in a year's time, and I think Jamie Carragher hinted at that, it is your decision as a player whether you want to move on to one of them other elite clubs. That's fair enough. You're at an age where you're able to do that. You've won a lot at Liverpool, so it's his prerogative. But yeah, I think possibly it isn't something that I'd be looking to do. I'd be looking to become the captain at Liverpool and create my own history at the club. You look at Phil Thompson and Steven Gerrard, two local lads who came through the academy and were able to lift European Cups, and that's what I'd be looking to follow on and do myself. So it is a bit of an odd decision, I think, for somebody who grew up as a Liverpool supporter and grew up in the city. You can understand a little bit of the anger and the disappointment from supporters that he has chosen this path, but ultimately it's his life and his career, and we have to respect that. I think the fans will respect it. We saw that in previous games, that they were very respectful on the terraces, so I don't think that'll change. But yeah, I think it's a bit of an odd decision, to be honest with you, and it isn't probably one that I would have made myself.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to be a popular decision. I think there will be respect. Obviously, there's still 3 more games. I assume we're probably going to see Trent play again, not least because Conor Bradley's only just come back from injury and is still kind of working his way back up. Obviously, there's the trophy lift, and then the following day there's going to be a parade around the city, which obviously Trent is going to be a part of and be involved in all of those things. So it is going to be interesting. I think the reaction from Liverpool fans towards him, obviously Arsenal being the first game, if he's involved there, will there be a kind of an uneasy mood or that kind of thing within the ground? I think it's quite hard to predict, isn't it, Michael, in terms of, you can look at the wider reactions and social media is only one element of that. Obviously, in the ground, it might be slightly different, but I don't know. It feels good. I think that we've got the clarity and we know, and he obviously hasn't said much throughout the season because he didn't want to get in the way of what Liverpool have done, that the games don't mean anything. But I don't know. I'm not quite sure what to expect if we do see him again this season.
Well, I think we will see him again this season. He's going to be involved in the final 3 games. I think the question is whether he's a substitute, whether he starts. But I think you've actually made a really good point there that Conor Bradley might not be fit to well, he probably is fit, but there's certainly some question marks about his fitness at the moment. It'd be great to see Curtis Jones slot in it right back up. That really would send a message, wouldn't it, at the weekend? But listen, I think he's going to. He will not get a good reception at the weekend. It's my guess. I always think as well that in those sorts of situations, you can have 9 people who clap and 1 person who boos, and the boos ring out louder. So it doesn't even, if he is booed, it's not even necessarily reflects that all fans feel this way. But I think there's enough kind of proportionate percentage of fans that do feel strongly enough that he probably will get booed in his final 2 games as a Liverpool player, which sums up really the choice he has made. And he has, I wonder whether he fully appreciates that choice, because he's talking about the hurt and hoping that Liverpool fans can forgive him, talking about the fact that he wants to come back next season and he obviously still wants to have that relationship with the club. But I personally just don't. I think he's going to find it very difficult. I think he might get a surprise by some of the reaction to it. And to just pick up on the point that Tom made there, Alexander-Arnold, he's lent into the fact that he is a Scouser, a local lad who's come through the academy. He's really drawn on that. You think about that Adidas advert years ago, the comments he made after he won the Champions League, that just a lad from the local area living his dreams. So that's why it stings even more, I think, for Liverpool fans now, that he's essentially chosen to turn his back on that. And that's fine. And as Tom said, you can make your own choices in life and in your career and everything. But he does have to deal with the consequences now of what the reaction of fans are going to be. And I think that certainly Scousers and local fans are not going to be happy and are going to find it difficult to accept that decision, especially when you go on to Real Madrid, who are essentially the biggest bully in the playground and have shown that multiple times over the last couple of years. Think the Ballon d'Or ceremony where they refused to show up. Think of the Copa del Rey final a few weeks ago where they, basically tried to intimidate the referees. Even the fact they still keep trying to get this Super League off the ground, all these sorts of things. They are the biggest kid in the playground, or the biggest bully in the playground. And Alexander-Arnold, who's always been such a massive part of Liverpool, who I think on the European stage at least have always felt like the underdog a little bit. I think Klopp really lent into that, and he's gone, listen, I'm done with that. I just want to go and take essentially slightly the easy way out and the easy trophies and probably a slightly bigger club, albeit there aren't many out there for Liverpool. So sorry, I'm ranting here a little bit, but I do think that he is going to be surprised at the reaction of fans, I think, over the coming days and weeks.
Yeah, it's been said a few times by a few different people and pundits and various things that, well, he's not joining a Liverpool rival, but he kind of is, really. I think if Liverpool are in the Champions League, they're in the Champions League and probably are one of the top 2 or 3 to go on and win that. They're among the favourites. Obviously, Real Madrid are that as well. But I mean, some of the most hurt moments of Trent's senior football career have come against Real Madrid. So it's not like he doesn't understand the kind of the links between those two clubs. You mentioned before, I think, Tom, about sort of the silence that he's had up until this point this season. Do you think he's made the right decision by not talking about it up until this point? Obviously, he explained in his interview that he didn't want to be the talking point. He didn't want to detract from Liverpool's season. And when they're going for all these trophies, it's obviously different now that they've got that wrapped up and there's nothing on the line, nothing to play for in the last bit of the season. But I've also seen him criticised for having not made any comments. He stopped in the mix zone once, which I think was back in sort of October, November time, and kind of said, I'm not going to talk about it. All of the other contracts that I've signed haven't been done in public. This one won't be either. But I don't know. I almost feel a little bit for him in this sense, in that he could have said something, but then he would have been criticised. He hasn't said something, so he's been criticised. Is there ever going to be a right or wrong way to leave Liverpool, and where do you think Trent sort of lies on that spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, we discussed it a little bit before coming on air. I think it's very difficult to leave a club like Liverpool and leave it in a fashion that kind of pleases everyone is going to be impossible ultimately. And I think the way it's kind of played out is that, he's gone down the route of kind of a dignified silence really for a lot of it, as we know. And I think possibly over time that kind of became undignified, inadvertently, of course. I think he is an intelligent lad and he's quite a measured individual as well. So he'll be fully aware of, what's kind of being said around it and the noise around sort of what's been happening. So yeah, I think there have been hints, haven't there, along the way as well. I remember the interview with Sky Sport earlier in the season. It was quite a subtle thing, but he was asked kind of about his future dreams as a player, whether he'd rather win the Champions League with Liverpool, I think was one of the options. One of the options was to win the Ballon d'Or, and he chose that. And I think that was possibly a small indication maybe of where his head was lying at that stage. And you've got to kind of think of it then. Is he seeing things now kind of down the individual route rather than possibly as a team or as a Liverpool player? I think he was starting to kind of see his life maybe outside of Liverpool, if you read between the lines now, looking back. And like you say, just before as well, that, he's not really given many interviews this season. He did give that interview, like you say, which hinted that he wasn't really going to address it. And that was kind of the end of that. So, yeah, there's been a lot of kind of having to read between the lines, and I think possibly it is one way of doing it. I think we live in such a world now with social media and stuff like that where things are an echo chamber, for a lot of people. And I think that, for him personally, I'd imagine it would have been very difficult, if he would have come out to say something maybe in November or do what Jurgen Klopp did and come out in March, say, and say that he was going. I think that maybe would have made things a little bit more difficult for him on the pitch and maybe focusing on that league championship, which was so important to go and get at the end of this season. But yeah, I think there's no good way to kind of leave a club. It's possibly the only way to do it where you're not kind of, hurting people in the middle of it and maybe drawing yourself into, a massive kind of conversation. But yeah, I think, it's looked very political as well. And I think that's straight out of the Real Madrid playbook as well, to be honest with you. It's kind of what we saw with Kylian Mbappe, where he kind of kept his head down and then went for nothing at the end of the season. It happened with David Alaba, players in the past as well. This seems to be the way Madrid do things now, the way they operate. They kind of say, run your contract down, we'll come and get you at the end of it. I think that's what's happened here, to be honest. So it's straight out of their playbook, and I think he's handled it possibly in the fashion you'd expect.
In terms of there being no transfer fee, Michael, how important do you think that is? Because I've seen quite a few takes where people have said, well, maybe if he'd have gone for a bit of money, or maybe if Liverpool had have sold him a couple of years ago. I think Ian Wright in the last sort of 24 hours has said, well, Liverpool should have just sold him last summer and they should have got the money in. I just can't really get on board with that myself, because Real Madrid wouldn't have paid the money, or certainly wouldn't have paid as much money as Liverpool would have wanted. Obviously, they came in January with a bid which Liverpool didn't want to accept. But I don't really think that the money matters too much. The bottom line is Liverpool are losing a player that they don't want to lose. He's a huge talent. He's unique. He's going to be really hard to replace. But does the transfer fee come into it at all for you, in terms of not just the fact that he is exiting, but the way in which he's done that?
I mean, I think it is a factor, yeah, because you've lost a supremely talented player for free, who is, if he had a 3-year contract, for instance, he's upwards of £100 million easily, probably more really. But I do think it's a factor, but I don't think in all of this it is the biggest factor of probably why Liverpool fans will feel so hurt. I think the fact that Conor Bradley's there actually does make it a little bit easier to swallow to a certain extent. But I think from Alexander-Arnold's perspective, I suspect he could wave a magic wand and get a transfer fee for Liverpool. He probably would do it. But it's not as simple as that, is it? If he, for instance, in the summer says, okay, I'll pen a new contract and then Real Madrid will come back in for me, you never know how things are going to go. You never know whether that is going to actually happen, whether suddenly a new kid comes through the youth system and that opportunity goes. If he wants to go to Real Madrid, I suppose that the transfer fee sadly becomes slightly irrelevant for him, and that if he is so set on joining Madrid, he just focuses on that. But I suppose there is the Jack Grealish example, when he signed a contract extension with Villa, didn't he, and had that release clause written into it, and then Man City came the following year and he went. So there is that aspect of it, but it's very difficult, and there's no guarantees that Madrid would have came back in from, as I say. So it certainly doesn't make it any easier to swallow from Liverpool's perspective, though. That's for sure.
Yeah, the release clause thing is interesting. I think Liverpool have always been extremely reluctant to do anything like that, because I suppose it then sets a precedent, doesn't it? If you've got a player who's coming in who potentially might one day want to go and play for Real Madrid or Barcelona, they can look at that and say, well, you've done it for him, maybe you can do it for me as well. I don't know whether Liverpool would have ever considered that being a possibility, but I just think in terms of the transfer fee, it's not like he cost Liverpool 100 million to begin with. They've not lost any money. He didn't cost them anything. He's won everything. For me, it's more a case of being disappointed that they've lost a really, really important player, and he'll be really, really difficult to replace as well. Obviously, moving forwards, that's something that Liverpool have got to think about, and I think it would be fair to say they've had long enough to consider it a possibility and come together and think about what that plan might be. So let's talk a little bit about the future. As ever, as journalists, we can't just talk about now. We've got to look ahead. We've got to look quickly to what comes next. Tom, in terms of right back and looking forward to next season, do you think it's a given that Liverpool should sign somebody to come in? Or is Conor Bradley the number one, and then maybe use one or two players that they've already got? I mean, is there anyone that stands out to you that they should sign if that is indeed the way that they go?
Yeah, I think first and foremost that I absolutely love Conor Bradley as a player. He's a very different player in terms of his skill set to Trent Alexander-Arnold, what he does on the pitch. We saw up against Chelsea in that second half, obviously when he came on the pitch. He's very bright. I think, again, he's a different kind of player in that final third, isn't he? But he can be a threat in his own right as well. He's more direct, I guess. But there's not many players in world football who can kind of spray a pass like Trent can. So I think that's what Liverpool are maybe going to have to look to replace, I think, in the summer. And it might not be at right back, I think. I think it might be kind of further forward, maybe in that number 10 position, which we know Arne Slot ideally likes to utilise. He certainly did at Feyenoord, so possibly that's something he'll look to do maybe in the second season at Liverpool. So I wouldn't be so surprised if they did go in for a player who can maybe play that number 10 role, or maybe somebody who's a bit more creative in that role than maybe a Dominic Szoboszlai has been so far this season. But yeah, I think in terms of the right back position, Conor Bradley, he stands out really, doesn't he, in terms of that replacement. He's a very different player to Trent, like I say. But yeah, I think there's been a lot of promise from him, from what he's shown. I think he showed in that Real Madrid game earlier in the season up against Kylian Mbappe. That is the level you've got to be at. And he certainly looked at the level, didn't he, in that game. I think the only kind of concern for me will be about injuries, his injury record. And we mentioned that earlier in the show a little bit. Possibly that's the kind of one thing for me with him. There's a little bit of concern. I think over the past couple of seasons, his injury record hasn't been the best. So, yeah, in terms of looking to the wider market, I think maybe Frimpong at Bayer Leverkusen, I read just before coming on air that there might be a release clause there. Maybe 35 million. There looks like, possibly a bit of a change at the guard there as well in terms of Xabi Alonso if he's going to go to Real Madrid as well. So this possibly might be the right time to go in for him. He's obviously a very different player to Trent and to Conor Bradley. He's more used to playing in sort of a back three or back five, but then sort of wing backs, isn't he? But yeah, I think he's certainly got a bit of a skill set in his own right as well that might make him quite useful for Liverpool. So he'd be the player that I'd possibly have an eye on. I think the other one is Ola Aina as well at Nottingham Forest. I think he's available on a free in the summer, so there might be something to do there as well. Possibly looking at Conor Bradley there, he's a player who you want to kind of usher in more so over the next few years. He's still so young, so maybe an experienced right back on a free as well might be quite an astute signing.
Yeah, Ola Aina was one that I wrote about a couple of weeks ago as a possible loophole almost for Liverpool to get through in terms of, not having to spend any money. And as you say, that would give, obviously, Conor Bradley the opportunity really to have a season where he's not straight away the Trent replacement. There's a couple of players that you can kind of rotate and slowly edge your way towards that. And really, I suppose, from both sides, assess whether that is the right thing to do moving forward. I think that's definitely a possibility, though there is some suggestion that Nottingham Forest might have an option to extend his contract by a year. So not necessarily a straightforward one in terms of that. But Michael, in terms of style of play, obviously Liverpool are never going to find another Trent Alexander-Arnold. I think it's pretty obvious they're going to have to do something a little bit differently. But which way would you go about it? Would you try and get somebody more defensively solid? That's always been the drawback with Trent. Would you go the other way and go for a Frimpong type player who is closer to a winger probably than a fullback? Is there a stylistic fit that you think Liverpool should look at? And have we seen maybe a few hints of that from what Arne Slot has done with his team so far this season?
Yeah, I think it's a real unknown, isn't it? Because, as you rightly said, you're not going to get a replacement for Trent Alexander-Arnold. He is such a unique footballer in the way he plays. And I was even just thinking there as we were chatting, is there anyone who you can think of is similar to him? And I thought, well, Kieran Trippier slightly played that role. Rico Lewis, but I don't even mean them as transfers, just in general as similar players. They just don't come close to Trent in terms of the range of passing, in terms of what he brings. He's such a unique footballer. I think, they're obviously... Conor Bradley is a fantastic player. I think the injury concerns are genuine and should be taken seriously. I think there's also a thought about... It's great when you're suddenly thrust into the limelight and you're motivated and you're passionate and you're trying to prove to everyone that you're ready to make that step up. Suddenly actually to then say, right, you've got to do it every week now. You've got to do it week in, week out. It's a very, very different challenge. So I think that would be one slight concern. I think that I thought of Ola Aina actually in terms of there could be a little bit of rotation there potentially as well. He used to come in. But I think if they were to move for Frimpong, for instance, what message would that send to Bradley? It would send a message where you're not ready to step up and play for Liverpool, and also we've signed a young right back who stylistically is totally different from you. You would almost borderline straight away start thinking, well, what future does he have at the club? Because he's always going to operate as a backup. So there's a lot of factors to go into it. And as Tom rightly says, there needs to be more creativity further up the pitch. Whether that comes from transfers, I don't know. I actually think that probably the players there are good enough to try and replace some of that creativity. And I think that tactically it will all change anyway without Alexander-Arnold, because they just won't have a similar right back. And then suddenly now you're going to have to look at the team to create more chances and more opportunities. So that's kind of a long-winded answer of me saying I don't really know, but I do think it's going to be a huge, huge change without him inside. Because, as I say, there's just no one like him in world football, really.
Yeah, I think one or two other positions. I mean, Dominic Szoboszlai, Arne Slot was asked about him in his press conference at the weekend, and he basically just said he's undroppable because he doesn't stop running, and you can't not play him, because if you don't play him, then Liverpool just have too many gaps in the team. I don't think that's necessarily going to change, but I do wonder if they've got maybe more of a focal point as a number 9. Maybe that's a way that you get the creativity in there. It doesn't necessarily, as we've all said across the course of the show, it doesn't necessarily have to be that you get that from right back, because let's be honest, not many teams have their creative fulcrum being at full back anyway, so it wouldn't be unusual for Liverpool to move away from that. But Tom, in terms of sort of moving forwards into next season, I mean, Mohamed Salah, Virgil van Dijk have been signed, Trent going. That always seemed like the most likely scenario. Are you in any way, are you feeling any differently about next season given this news? I mean, it's not news in terms of it being new, but obviously is now confirmed. Are you still as confident as you were before in terms of what Liverpool can do, even though Trent has decided that actually it might be better to go somewhere else?
Yeah, I think it'll certainly be a blow, and I think, the complexion of Liverpool and sort of, even the setup in terms of, tactically, that is going to have to adapt, I think, next season. And they possibly won't look the same team in some ways, I think, next season. And you'll really see a hole in maybe that right-hand side of the pitch. I really do believe that. That's how good he is. I think he's been a real focal point in his own right at right-back. And like you say, he's a unique player. He's been like having Kevin De Bruyne or Steven Gerrard at right-back in terms of that passing range and creativity. So I think Liverpool are really going to miss him. But yeah, I think, the club goes on. There's been examples, in the past of many players who've moved on, who've had big impacts at Liverpool, and the club's always gone on to further success. So yeah, I imagine that, there will be a period of maybe the club having to kind of dust themselves down in terms of this news. But the good thing is that they will have been fully aware of Trent's intentions a lot earlier than we were. So yeah, you're hoping that, the background sort of plans have been in place for a while now, you're hoping, and possibly they've got something up the sleeves coming into the summer now. But yeah, I'm still confident. I think that, looking at it now without other teams kind of making signings, I still think Liverpool will be the favourites going into next season, which is a bit of a rarity in our lifetimes, isn't it, to be able to say that. I think that Liverpool in general are kind of on top at the moment in terms of, every position in the pitch. They've got top class players, they possibly got a couple in every position as well. And obviously, tying down the talisman in Mo Salah and the captain in Virgil van Dijk as well has been a massive positive in recent weeks. So things are still positive for Liverpool, but I think this is one they've really got to get right as well. And I think there does possibly need to be a replacement in some respect for Trent, like we say before, possibly further up the pitch. But I think Liverpool are missing, but you're just hoping kind of plans are in place now of sort of forward planning for the future.
Yeah, I know transfer planning is obviously an ongoing thing. That's been something that Liverpool have been thinking about for a long time. Certainly Richard Hughes now is well settled into the job and knows exactly what needs to be done in the summer. But just to finish, Michael, I think it's going to be an interesting challenge for Arne Slot as well. Obviously, he's inherited a group of players. It hasn't really changed because he's not really used Federico Chiesa. But I think, obviously, you're clutching at straws a little bit to take positives from losing a player as good as Trent. But it will give him a bit more of an opportunity really on the coaching pitches this summer to really nail down what he wants his Liverpool team to look like in the next few years. It's not quite a clean slate and a new start, but it does feel like a real opportunity this summer for him to really drill into these players. Yeah,
I think you're right to say that there's no positive to him leaving. I think that the one, shall we say, silver lining or kind of little tiny thing you can take from it is because you've got such a unique player in Trent Alexander-Arnold, you've got to play him. And then the team almost has to form around him a little bit because he is so unique. Now he can go and find his the sort of fullbacks he wants. And, you know, Addison, I think I mentioned this last time in the podcast, there's obviously been talk about Frimpong and Carquez. They are really offensive, attacking fullbacks who like to overlap, run with the ball. That is totally different than the way Liverpool set up now. So it could be a completely different look for Liverpool in many regards next season tactically, but also coming from fullback. And I think whatever happens, they've got to sign a right back. You know, there has been this suggestion that, well, if you've got Kwanzaa and you've got Gomez and maybe sign another centre-back who can fill in that role, I think they've got to sign a natural right back, whatever happens, whether that's the first choice to replace Alexander-Arnold or whether it's backup for Bradley is the question. But they can't, in my opinion, kind of try and work the system a little bit to try and avoid signing the right back. They've got to get one in the summer. And I think that actually going into the summer now, it's the one position where they don't have two natural players to play in that role. They've got two in every position or right back now. So I think I said a couple of weeks ago, I actually see it almost as the priority position going into the summer market, which is bizarre in some ways because it's such a strong position this season. But it's really interesting, and there's so many aspects we're gonna discover over transfers over the next couple of weeks. And we said last week that we'll not descend into a transfer podcast. I'll end it on with saying the exact same thing again. Let's not go down that route just yet.
Yeah, I think we'll have plenty of time to discuss that across the course of the summer, but it is going to be interesting. I think it would definitely be a priority position for me. That the big question mark really is there's not really a load of obvious options. Jeremy Frimpong is obviously the one, as Tom said, he has a release clause. It's just a case of him being almost the opposite fullback really to Trent in lots of ways. The way he positions himself, the way he is, I'm not quite sure how that would fit in, but hey, that's not my job to work that out. That's up to Richard Hughes, Arne Slot, the coaching team, the recruitment. And I think the one thing we can say in the last few years, when Liverpool have made signings, they have generally tended to get those right. So it's certainly going to shape up to be an interesting summer, I think, for the Premier League champions. But I think that's just about all we've got time for on this week's Liverpool.com podcast. Thank you very much to Tom Beattie and to Michael Plant for joining me, Matt Addison. We'll be back next week with the next Liverpool.com podcast.